But more on the ice now, and two British men who became the first to drive across the frozen waters of the Bering Strait from Alaska to Russia have arrived back home. Steve Brooks and Graham Stratford set off from Alaska on Friday. At the last minute, the Russian authorities refused to let them onto the mainland, but they managed to reach a Russian-controlled island to complete their mission.
Welcomed home from the icy wastes, the champagne was appropriately enough well chilled. The Ice Challenger team may not have reached mainland Russia, but they've still claimed a first in global exploration. Using a specially designed all-terrain vehicle called Snowbird 6, itself dwarfed by the huge ice floes, they'd planned to drive across the treacherous Bering Strait. To drive from the United States to Russia, they'd have to follow a route crossing the old Cold War frontier between Alaska and Siberia. The expedition started at the town of Wales. From there, the explorers hugged the coastline up to Nome. Then they set off across the Bering Strait. But far from being frozen solid, the sea was a shifting, tumbling mass of ice. The largely untested Snowbird performed better than expected, climbing icebergs, powering its way through crushed ice and floating on water. The disappointment was that 14 miles into their 56-mile crossing, the Russians said the team didn't have permission to cross the border.
And they're saying without that piece of paper we have to arrest you.
So what are they threatening to do?
We've got 6 other pieces of paper.
So the explorers had to settle for crossing the international date line and just setting foot on the Russian island of Big Diomede.
It's a great shame the Berlin Wall came down a while ago and the Bering Wall clearly still exists. And this has shone a light on that fact, and we'd like to work with the Russian and American governments now and encourage them to unthrottle this area of the planet, which needs to be freed up.
And tackling the frozen politics of the area means before long the team may well be back. George Eakin, BBC News.
Well, the team leader, Steve Brooks, joins us now. Steve, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Glad you made it, as you must be. How did you come up with this idea? I mean, were you sitting around the pub one night and thought, I know, a great idea, let's drive to Russia?
No, it's not a new idea. We've climbed all the mountains and been to the bottom of the oceans, and for many years people have been, like Ford and Land Rover and Renault Fines, have been looking at this idea of trying to drive around the world. But to do that, you've got to cross the Bering Strait.
And how complicated, how difficult? I mean, the craft that you were in looked absolutely amazing, these 2 giant screws on each side.
Well, it became clear to us that although people were trying to drive around the world, the real challenge is the Bering Strait. And so we've been concentrating on that. And developing a vehicle to do that has been a real challenge.
Well, is it, I mean, just looking at some of those pictures, bits of it are frozen, bits of it are sea, other bits are kind of icebergs. I mean, I can't think of anything worse.
It's very tricky because the whole environment changes all the time. The ice is actually flowing north, and it's got to go through the narrow strait, so it's crushing together, and all the ice is piling into each other, and then as it goes through, it starts breaking open again as it flows north.
When that bit that we showed when you went in off the ice into the sea, I mean, what were you thinking then? Did you think you'd sink, which is what I thought when I saw the pictures first?
Well, actually, that was a mistake.
It was a mistake.
In Hereford, when we were testing in mud, it was going in very slowly. And when I got out onto the ice, I pushed the levers forward, not realising how quickly it would go. And that was a terrifying moment when we went straight into the water.
Right, OK, so it all went according to plan, not.
Yes.
What about the Russians? I mean, where did they go wrong here?
It's a great shame. The Berlin Wall came down a long time ago, but the Bering Wall is still there. We've been negotiating with them for a year. In theory, we had permission to go in, but there's a lot of bureaucracy in that part of the world, and we really need to have a go now at breaking that down so that the local people can move around and get trade going again.
Because they're very sensitive. Well, both sides are actually. The Americans were very sensitive because they got defence installations up in that area, haven't they? Or in the Alaskan area, and the Russians had too.
Yeah, well, no one realises that all the years of the superpower, America was 2 miles away from Russia, Little Diomede and Big Diomede. They were that close to each other. So yes, it's a very sensitive area, but it's time now that it started freeing up because there's a lot of poverty up there. And the whole area needs to free up.
On
and
both
get going
sides,
again.
both sides, actually.
On both sides.
Are you going to go back?
It's a bit too early to say at the moment. We definitely feel our goal was to drive from America to Russia, and we feel we've done that. Now the next challenge has got to be for somebody to drive around the world. Whether or not that's going to be us or not, I don't know.
Well, maybe the paperwork won't defeat you this time, and you'll be able to do it all the way and get onto the mainland.
Yeah, we definitely want to work with the Russians and actually help solve this problem to free up the whole area.
Well, Steve, you've cheered us up. It's been a miserable week on other things, so thanks very much for coming in.
My pleasure.
Thank you.